Pitfalls of the Spiritual Journey. If you are wondering what the spiritual path should be and whether you are making mistakes in your choices or actions, if you are looking for confirmation of your steps in signs or tips, or if the abundance of spiritual and esoteric practices only confuses you and makes you feel unsure or lost in its diversity, then I hope my explanation of some principles will give you absolute clarity of mind on this matter. To understand how correct your spiritual path is, you need, first of all, to clarify for yourself what a spiritual path is in general. This is not about the realization of unbridled desires or the visualization of obsessive thoughts. All of this is rather anti-spiritual in nature and is more likely to hinder spiritual development. Spirituality is always directed towards the divine and is achievable only through overcoming lower thoughts and desires, dissolving the obsessive forces of the subconscious, samskaras, and pacifying the ego. By accurately understanding and clarifying this for yourself, everything unimportant will fall away by itself, and many difficulties, mistakes, and misunderstandings will disappear on their own. At its core, the basic principle of spiritual development, regardless of tradition or religion, is to overcome the ego, or strive to purify what is called Antahkarana in Hinduism, facilitating our advancement towards higher consciousness and unity with the divine, samadhi. In Christian mystical theology, union with the divine is often referred to as theosis, or divinization. This may be interpreted differently in different religions and traditions, or even within the yoga traditions themselves, the concept may be explained differently. In my explanations, I will primarily use yoga and Hindu terminology. Yoga and Hinduism offer perhaps the most comprehensive and detailed explanations of the processes, aspects of consciousness, and practices related to spiritual development. This does not, however, diminish the value of other traditions and religions. Antahkarana represents the unity of mental faculties, and these faculties include ahamkara, ego, buddhi, intellect, manas, mind, and chitta, consciousness or memory. There may be differences in interpretation, as some may talk about the purification and restoration of the proper functioning of the Antahkarana. Some of the mystics talk about the importance of dissolving the ego, ahamkara. Someone calls to purify the consciousness, which in yoga means to calm the modifications of the mind, chitta vritti, which is fueled by subconscious habits and past impressions, vasana and samskara. This approach underscores the importance of purifying the mind and emotions, chitta shuddhi. Someone calls for to calm the mind, manas. And since intellect, mind, ego, and memory together are Antahkarana, where all four aspects are interconnected, then all these narratives call for the same thing. And regardless of interpretations and terminologies, only by calming the mind, Antahkarana, can one achieve higher states of consciousness or unity with the divine. In Christian mystical theology, the process of dissolving the ego or stilling the mind is often referred to as kenosis and hesychasm. In Sufi traditions, the term fana means the annihilation of the self or ego, where the individual self is dissolved in the awareness of the divine presence. That is, any spiritual practice, one way or another, is inherently aimed at dissolving the ego or purifying what is called Antahkarana in Hinduism. Any practice not aimed at this is not inherently spiritual. There are many pseudo-spiritual materials being circulated now, spreading misinterpreted or often twisted knowledge and practices. Therefore, now, more than ever, it is important to distinguish true knowledge and practices that foster spiritual development from modern speculative and manipulative practices. Despite their charming attractiveness and simplicity, such practices often lead one away from the spiritual path. The spiritual heritage left to us by the sages and spiritual traditions is great, and by relying on these traditions we can clearly distinguish the true from the far-fetched or speculative. That's what traditions and religions are for, to provide a person with a roadmap complete with instructions and guidance for the spiritual journey, safeguarding them from the pitfalls of deception and self-deception. However, people today often depart from traditions and choose their path intuitively as it seems to them, although very often their choice is largely dictated by the ego. When following an individual's spiritual path, it's crucial to be aware of both ego traps and external pitfalls. Having previously understood what the spiritual path is and what leads us to spiritual transformation and what does not, we can easily evaluate the practices or methods that interest us or which sometimes are simply being imposed or sold to us. Yoga has a vast array of different traditions and practices, and there is even a classification of possible paths of spiritual development known as the 4 paths of yoga. These paths provide different routes to achieve spiritual growth and self-realization. Each path caters to different personality types and inclinations, allowing practitioners to choose the one that resonates most with their nature. Usually, these are Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, although depending on the tradition, both the list and the number may differ. Karma Yoga, the path of action. Karma Yoga focuses on selfless service and actions performed without attachment to results, promoting the dissolution of the ego. Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. Bhakti Yoga emphasizes love and devotion towards a personal God or the divine, which also contributes to the dissolution of the ego. Raja Yoga, the path of meditation. Raja Yoga, also known as the royal path, emphasizes meditation and mental discipline to control the mind and senses. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. Jnana Yoga is the path of wisdom and knowledge. It involves the study of scriptures, reflection, and meditation to achieve direct insight into the nature of reality and the self through deep, reflective practices to discern the true self from the ego. Each of these paths can be practiced individually or in combination, allowing individuals to progress towards spiritual enlightenment in a way that aligns with their unique tendencies and circumstances. There are many practices attributed to various traditions or religions, but they all, in one way or another, pursue common goals. In meditation and various contemplative practices, we calm our mind and remove the fluctuations of the mind, chitta-vritti. Mindfulness meditation, vipassana, in the Buddhist tradition helps practitioners become aware of and detach from their thoughts and egoic patterns, asavas. Similarly, in Christian mysticism, silent prayer, centering prayer, involves quieting the mind and centering oneself on the presence of God. The main goal of self-inquiry practice Atma Vichara in Jnana Yoga is to realize the true self, Atman, by continuously questioning, who am I? This practice aims to dissolve the ego, ahamkara, and transcend ignorance, avidya, leading to the direct experience of unity with the ultimate reality, Brahman, and achieving liberation, moksha. In devotional service to God, Bhakti Yoga, we dissolve our ego, ahamkara. In Christian traditions, prayer and devotion serve as powerful tools for dissolving the ego. Various practices of austerities, tapas, and renunciations also lead us to this goal. We also dissolve our ego in the practices of selfless service to others, karma yoga, which in Christianity is usually called works of mercy. Various mantras help calm the mind and are often expressions of devotion, helping to pacify ahamkara, which promotes the experience of spiritual connection with God. The practices of Kundalini and Kriya Yoga are aimed not only at raising the Kundalini energy up the chakras, but also at their gradual cleansing, which is essentially the cleansing of Antahkarana. By understanding these principles, we can approach our spiritual journey with discernment and clarity. Each genuine spiritual practice, irrespective of its tradition, ultimately seeks to dissolve the ego, the false self, facilitating our progress towards higher consciousness and unity with the divine. Spiritual practices are those that bring us closer to the divine and do not distance us from it or keeps us in ignorance. However, some modern spiritual instructors, under the guise of spiritual transformation, increasingly sell us practices and techniques that often distract us from the true spiritual path, leading to even greater entrenchment of the ego and attachments. If we pay attention to the traditions of spiritual practices, especially yoga, we will find that the manifestation of superpowers, Siddhis, is characteristic of yoga. As the sadhaka develops spiritually, they may develop various superpowers, such as foresight. This is similar to fortune-telling, astrology, and numerology. The power of manifestations and visualizations, or others. However, while in authentic traditions and explanations of sages and spiritual mentors, Siddhis are considered only as side effects of yoga, and infatuation with them can interfere with further spiritual progress. Modern interpretations often advocate targeted practices for manifesting desires or foresight, while yogis, overcoming the influence of the forces of lower nature and gaining power over them, achieve various siddhis associated with these forces. Modern irresponsible mentors, under the guise of spiritual development, often promote practices that can lead to dependence on lower forces and their influences, attachment to expectations, and identification with the ego. One prevalent trend is the emphasis on manifestations and visualizations. These practices are often touted as powerful tools to attract desires and achieve personal goals. However, in modern interpretation, very often, these practices carry the risk of reinforcing egoic desires and material attachments. Instead of promoting inner peace and dissolution of the ego, they can lead to increased attachment to outcomes and external validation. This focus on material success and personal gain diverts attention from the deeper work of spiritual transformation, which requires letting go of the very attachments that these practices can strengthen. Similarly, the fascination with numerology, astrology, synchronicities, and hidden messages in numbers is another area where modern spiritual mentors often lead seekers astray. These practices can become a distraction, encouraging an obsessive search for external signs and validations rather than fostering inner growth and self-awareness. While these sciences have historical and symbolic significance, they do not inherently lead to the calming of the mind or the dissolution of the ego. In fact, they can often have the opposite effect, feeding into a person's need for control, certainty, and the illusion of a predefined destiny. Numerology and astrology can provide interesting insights into personality traits and life patterns, but when overemphasized, they risk creating dependency and a false sense of predestination. This can prevent individuals from taking responsibility for their actions and hinder their ability to live mindfully in the present moment. The over-reliance on astrological charts and numerological predictions can lead to a fatalistic mindset, diverting focus from the inner work necessary for true spiritual growth. The obsession with synchronicities and hidden messages in numbers can also be a form of spiritual bypassing, where individuals use these phenomena to avoid confronting deeper psychological and spiritual issues. These practices can create an illusion of being on a spiritual path, while in reality they often lead to more entanglement in the mind's fabrications and the ego's narratives. True spiritual practice involves rigorous self-examination, mindfulness, and the cultivation of qualities such as compassion, humility, and detachment. It requires dissolving the ego and calming the modifications of the mind, chitta vritti, which cannot be achieved through superficial practices that cater to the ego's desires. Authentic spiritual traditions emphasize inner transformation, ethical living, and direct experiences of the divine or ultimate reality, rather than external validations and material successes. While modern spiritual guides may offer practices that seem appealing and easy to follow, it is crucial to discern whether these practices truly align with the principles of genuine spiritual growth. Practices that reinforce the ego and create new attachments are ultimately counterproductive. By focusing on the deeper work of calming the mind and dissolving the ego, we can embark on a path that leads to true enlightenment and unity with the divine. There are many time-tested traditions from Christian to Hindu, like Yoga, Sankhya, or Advaita Vedanta, and many great mentors and spiritual teachers like Sri Aurobindo, Ramana Maharshi, Swami Sivananda, and many others whose teachings can give you wisdom and illuminate the path to a spiritual life devoid of pitfalls and contradictions. These traditions and teachers emphasize the importance of inner transformation, ethical living, and direct experiences of the divine or ultimate reality, rather than external validations and material successes. The practices they transmit lead to overcoming the ego and purifying the Antahkarana. It is through this deep inner work that we can achieve higher states of consciousness and unity with the divine, leading to a life of true fulfillment and peace.